This week I've been going over the prologue of Game of Thrones, the first book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. But how does this prologue compare to the show? So this video, I want to compare the show versus the book for the prologue of A Game of Thrones. While they're different, I actually like the changes they made in the show, so let's dive in. In the books, we start off 9 days into their ranging. In the show, we see them leaving the wall and passing through the gate. From there, in the show, they explore beyond the wall, and we don't know how long they've been out at this point, where we know very clearly in the prologue. Which is a problem with not being in someone's head. You have to have your actor say everything aloud, and it can become clunky dialogue that no one wants. The men in the show and the books are the same. Waymore Royce, the leader of the party, Will the scout, and Garrett, the more experienced Night's Watch member. Though, of course, they look physically different, and Garrett doesn't have all the frostbite injuries. Just like in the books, Garrett and Royce quarrel. Garrett is a lot more experienced and expects a certain level of respect, and Royce is a young, arrogant lord.
We should head back to the wall.
Do the dead frighten you?
Our orders were to track the wildlings. We tracked them. They won't trouble us no more.
You don't think he'll ask us how they died? Get back on your horse.
However, we don't get as much bickering in the show as we do in the prologue, just because pacing is a little bit more difficult in a TV show, and to just show them quarreling over and over again doesn't make as much sense. Pacing is so huge in television shows, especially for the first episode of Game of Thrones. They needed to hook people in. Also, it's hard to convey certain things in a show like you do in the books. In the show, Will finds the Wildling Raiders they were sent to find quickly. They are horribly dismembered and in a symbol left by the others. This is very different than how Will finds them in the book, so here's a direct reading of Will describing what he saw of the wildling bodies. "The camp is 2 miles further on, over that ridge, hard beside a stream," Will said. "I got as close as I dared. There's 8 of them, men and women both. No children I could see. They put up a lean-to against the rock. The snow's pretty well covered it now, but I could still make it out. No fire burning, but the fire pit was still plain as day. No one moving. I watched a long time. No living man ever lay so still." "Did you see any blood?" "Well, no," Will admitted. "Did you see any weapons?" "Some swords, a few bows. One man had an axe, heavy-looking, double-bladed, a cruel piece of iron. It was on the ground beside him, right by his hand." "Did you make note of the position of the bodies?" Will shrugged. "A couple are sitting up against the rock, most of them on the ground, fallen-like." "Or sleeping?" Royce suggested. "Fallen," Will insisted. "There's one woman up in the ironwood, half hid in the branches. Far eyes." He smiled thinly. "I took care she never saw me. When I got closer, I saw that she wasn't moving neither." Despite himself, he shivered. In the books, the bodies are just leaning against rocks, there's no blood, and there's no children. In the show, it is a bloodbath of dismembered bodies. The difference in the show is just to make it more frightening and horror-esque. I mean, they could have had just the bodies lying in the snow, but I feel like the dismembering, the blood, and the symbol made it a lot more intriguing to viewers. We also learn later that the White Walkers left these symbols, which are the symbols of the Children of the Forest, their sacred symbols, to pervert them and mock them. It was the White Walker's middle finger to the children of the forest, basically. In the book, we don't get the symbol or the bloodbath. Another change is in the book, Garrett is actually left behind and Will takes Royce to the camp. When they get to the camp and they don't see any of the wildlings, Royce sends Will up into a tree, and that's when the others come out. And Royce actually fights one of the others like an absolute fucking bamf. Unfortunately, though, he's cut down very quickly. And then the others just butcher him. Will eventually climbs down from the tree, and that's when a white-ified Royce chokes him out, and we also learn that Garrett had become spooked and ran away, so he survived. Well, we learn that in a different chapter. In the show, all three go to investigate, don't see the bodies, and Will is ordered by Garrett to find the wildlings.
See where they went.
Garrett, unfortunately, is frozen in place when a White Walker appears behind Waymore and kills him. Garrett runs, and Will, hearing the screams, also runs. Garrett and Will meet only for Garrett to be decapitated by a White Walker and his head thrown before Will. Will survives this encounter and is the one to be seen on the chopping block with Ned. So yeah, huge change, the fact that Garrett is the one that lives in the book and Will dies, but in the show, Garrett dies and Will survives. Also, for some reason, there's only one White Walker, and he just let Will go? Why? Why'd you let him go? Maybe to send a message? Maybe to say, hey, we're coming to fuck you up? I don't know. Ego. Pride. However, something I found cool, just like in the prologue, in the show, the White Walker appears to have a language. Though we learn later on D&D decided not to go with a language for the White Walkers and just wanted them to be silent. So to summarize, the biggest changes from the Game of Thrones prologue and the show: less time beyond the wall to develop these three characters and way less dialogue in the show, more fast-paced horror in the show than the slow build we get in the books. In the show, they use dismembered and bloody corpses to create a terrifying scene than the bloodless and childless one we got in the books, or described to us in the books. Royce is killed without fighting in the show, and in the show we only see one White Walker, not the multiples we see in the book, who are also talking in their own language and then just brutally killing Royce. Will isn't killed by a white Royce and instead gets to flee south. Garrett is killed instead of Will by decapitation, which there was no decapitation in the prologue chapter. Now, are there a million other little changes between the prologue in Game of Thrones and the first scene in the show? Of course, and overall, I think they did a great job adapting the prologue to TV. As I said before, pacing is a big issue. You wanted to get viewers hooked in, and making it more grotesque and just really got people intrigued. Though I personally do really love the slow build and the prologue to this threat of the others, but for a TV show, I think they did a great job. But what are your thoughts? What do you think about the changes between the prologue of Game of Thrones and of the first scene in the show? Do you feel like they did our boy Royce dirty? Dude was an arrogant prick, but dance with me then. That's so epic. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you think. I do, sorry. That line is so epic. You have this young guy in front of this enemy that's so unknown and freaky, and he goes, yeah, you wanna fuck with me? Let's go. Then he gets super fucked, but, you know. You're still a bamf, Royce. You're still a bamf in my book. Anyways, I'll be continuing going over these chapters, doing verses, what ifs, and so on, so stay tuned. Also, Dune and the Witcher series, and Wheel of Time, and the Kingkiller Chronicles. There's a lot coming, so prepare yourself.